G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. We're in Glenninnis. I'm about to go home. I thought we might listen to the Naked Scientist while we drive.
Legal infrastructure that we've had in place for the last 50 years or so.
Mind you, if Carolyn's
might
robots
even
take
be able
over,
to
then
see
we may end
the
up having to have
moon
robot courts, mightn't we?
above the trees.
Carolyn, just looking at the
roofs.
practicalities though, it sounds lovely. Let's turn Mars into a home from home by terraforming it. Is that reasonable? Is that scientifically plausible to do that on the scale of the whole planet?
Well, I guess it depends how much of a rush you're in. You know, if it really is a lifeboat, well then I think we're all shocked, because it's going to take, I would guess, several millennia to happen. If you want to terraform a whole planet, you're talking about changing its climate, changing its surface. So not only do you have to thicken and enrich the atmosphere, you have to make it warmer, you need to perhaps introduce some greenhouse gas, you know, methane, ammonia, that warms up the carbon dioxide, thickens the atmosphere. There's a lot that's got to happen, and we could do it. I'm not saying it isn't technologically possible, and I do share a lot of Jill's reservations about, you know, whether we should do it and just all of that. But a key thing is that Mars does not have a strong magnetic field. It doesn't have the magnetosphere. So even if you build up this wonderful atmosphere, you warm up the planet, you need to retain that atmosphere.
I was going to say, how do you stop that atmosphere being whipped away by the very process that has left Mars this prune of a planet that it is right now?
As Ryan was saying, Mars was once a much more hospitable planet. It had this thick atmosphere. You know, it had the volcanic activity. We even think it had a strong magnetic field, but it doesn't now. And so you're leaving this wonderful new atmosphere being stripped away. So perhaps if you're really going to do it, maybe you are going to be terraforming Mars, but maybe not start off with the whole planet. Maybe start off with a few select biomes, perhaps as Richard suggests, start off with the moon, find a nice crater near some resources, near some sunlight, do the terraforming, or, you know, have a try at terraforming on a very local scale within easy reach of Earth, and then move on to doing similar things on Mars, building these biomes, doing things slowly, rather than just wading in and potentially wrecking a whole planet, because, you know, again, as Jill said, our track record on Earth isn't brilliant, so we need to be very sure about what we're doing.
Now, a mission to Mars is regarded by many as the next giant leap. So let's first of all take a look back at the legacy of the last giant leap. Colonise has been looking at one of history's defining speeches.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the other two.
In 1962, the then United States President John F. Kennedy gave a historic speech at Rice University, Houston, when he announced the USA's commitment to sending an American to the moon by the end of the decade. In the 1960s, travel to the moon was just as big a challenge as the Mars trip seems today, and many of the arguments for and against were the same.
To be sure, all this costs us all a good deal of money. This year's space budget is 3 times what it was in January 1961, and it is greater than the space budget of the previous 8 years combined. That budget now stands at $5,400,000,000 a year, a staggering sum, though somewhat less than we pay for cigarettes and cigars every year.
Of course, a challenge of this level had more objectives than purely to inspire, and the political motives were almost certainly the greatest influence on America's success. The space race became an extension of the Cold War, and the Russians had twice beaten the USA, first with the satellite Sputnik, and then with human spaceflight. Kennedy needed a challenge that he felt he could win, to pull the American people together and reaffirm America's status as a leading world power. Today, human space travel is once again on the agenda, and the challenge is even bigger. Could it be that we're at the start of yet another space race?
If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. the exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not. And it is one of the great adventures of all time. And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space.
John F. Kennedy there with his landmark moon speech. We'll come to the question of whether there's a space race going on in a moment. I suspect Jill will have something to contribute to that. But first of all, Richard, they talked about stimulus of science and the injection of vast amounts of money. Is it a reality that you put this money in and it doesn't just get spent in the sky? It does turn into tangible asset value here on Earth?
Oh, absolutely. You can actually look. There is evidence, direct evidence, that the Apollo program stimulated education, stimulated the PhD, stimulated technology, all sorts of reasons why it was a good thing. The tragedy was that it wasn't really a giant leap. It was a step and then a step back, because we're not there now. We don't have a moon base. We don't have any of this stuff. But there are still people who are inspired by Apollo, very much so. Young tech entrepreneurs. I was talking to one the other day in Los Angeles. He's started up a new company and has commissioned an artist to do a full-size picture of a lunar lander on the wall of the building where the lunar lander was originally built, because that's where they are, that's where they set their tech company up, and they are inspired by these guys.
But were they inspired as much as that amount of money could buy you if you just inspired scientists to develop things here on Earth?
Well, I think the danger is you can get into this, oh, we could do this or we could do that. It's a ludicrous argument, because we can have healthcare, we can have education, we can have science on Earth, and we can do space stuff. And if you start getting into the, oh, we only do space stuff because it will produce Teflon, or it'll produce, better materials, or all those, there are so many reasons to do it. And you can draw an economic case for it, you can draw a technological case for it, but I think the real case is aspiration, inspiration, and the fact that these people who walked on the moon, these missions, these amazing people who went to the moon, are still inspiring people today and still inspiring entrepreneurs today. Well, that justifies it in my mind.
And David Bowie songs are more popular than ever.
Well, indeed, yeah.
And Jill, are we seeing, do you think, a sort of space race Mark II now? And is that a good thing?
I don't want to downplay the significance of the scientific achievements during that time, and certainly it was inspirational, but I don't think it's worth whitewashing the geopolitics of the first space race. A lot of people don't realize that before the United States decided to land on the moon, they thought about bombing it instead. Also, the day that they left the plaque that said, "We came in peace and all mankind," it was the height of the Vietnam War. And so politics was very much a driver at that time, and it's worth keeping that in mind, if only because it helps us think about how we're going to continue space exploration and exploitation in the future. So we need to sort of remind ourselves that is part of the history. Is that repeating itself now? I'm uncomfortable with using the direct analogy of a second space race for a couple of reasons. The main one being that it's a different landscape now. In the 60s and the 70s, it was primarily states that were acting in outer space, that were entities who had space capabilities, and we've seen a diversification of the types of actors that we have in outer space. Not only there being more spacefaring countries, but we have private actors, we have individuals, and also a complicated blending of these actors. So rarely is it just a state government that has these capabilities. And so it's an awkward analogy in my mind, and I don't think it does us much good to sort of superimpose that narrative, because it sets us up for a potential vision of competition that might not necessarily be there. Having said that, politics is behind it, and there is going to be a level of prestige related to making strides in this direction.
Who owns Mars?
Well, exactly. I was just going to say, I mean, as we know from the first treaty that was established over outer space in the 1960s, which is widely respected, nobody owns any part of outer space. It's the common heritage of mankind, and no country, well, that's part of the comment, specifies that no country can lay claim to a celestial body, but
we can presume that that will apply to private companies eventually as well. But
So
that
if Ryan ends up being the first one there, will Ryan be king of Mars?
Absolutely not. He can be a squatter, but he cannot own it. And I think it's interesting that countries have nonetheless managed to place flags on the moon, not just the United States, but 5 other countries. And so there's clearly a political significance in landing on these planets, but it doesn't imply ownership.
Ryan, are you comfortable with that? You're not going to be crowned anytime soon?
Well, I think increasingly what we're going to see is collaboration in space in the future, because no one nation will be able to afford something as insane in terms of the cost as terraforming, which would cost around at least $1 trillion to be able to do. So we're going to see public-private partnerships working together in order to make this happen. We're already seeing with private companies supplying the International Space Station that they're driving down the costs. And we've just seen recently actually that it looks like Europe and Russia are looking to team up together to enable a moon-based venture. So I'm very optimistic about the future. It's no longer a race, it's a cooperative endeavour.
Just a personal question for a minute. Are you not uncomfortable with the prospect that you wouldn't come back?
No, I think it's part of the main I think it makes sense to get a one-way trip for the first one. You can make the economic case that it's cheaper, you get more return also. But I think the inspiration factor of having a group of 4 people from 4 different continents making scientific research on the surface, leaving a lasting legacy, so just going and rather than bringing it back, bring it. I don't want the impact that I can leave behind.
How did you go? Is it because it's an hospitable place, or is this scientists who don't feel the same as
No, it's because I know a bit too much about Mars and know that I probably wouldn't enjoy being on the surface. I'd love to see it, don't get me wrong. I'm too much invested in Earth right now. I think I'm quite happy to stay put.
Today we've discussed just the article for this trip to Mars, but then it looks like probably going to go anyway, be it through the government or the private companies. And in fact, Sheffield
Houston, where it's the first really serious look at examination of potential sites in what they call exploration zones. In particular, they're going to be starting with people putting forward proposed site exploration zones, not only to consider what you can do scientifically at these sites, what geological forms you can study, the history of Mars, habitability, discovering ancient life, but also to look for resources that colonies on Mars could survive on. So it's both a scientific and an engineering endeavour. So scientists and engineers over the next over 3 days next week are going to be presenting and discussing this potential, and that really sets the process going. The idea is that potentially NASA would be sending humans to Mars in the 2030s, but we need to start building the science case and developing the engineering skills required to be able to do that.
Thanks, Angie. That's Sanjeev Gupta, and thank you also this week to Carolyn Crawford, Ryan McDonald, Richard Hollingham and Jill Stewart for joining us on our panel. Thank you also to Connie Orbach for production. Join us next week when we'll be firmly back on planet Earth, exploring the new world of electric vehicles, and we'll find out what happens when a naked scientist gets his hands on a Tesla electric supercar and the top-of-the-range Merc sports car. The Naked Scientist comes to you from Cambridge University. It's supported by the STFC and the EPSRC. I'm Chris Smith. This is RN, and thank you very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.
Have you ever had your wires crossed or suffered because someone else has? Pocket Docs is a competition looking for true stories around the theme of
So there we have it. Driving home from Colonise Mars. According to the Naked Scientist, it's going to take thousands of years and trillions of dollars. And I don't think it's going to happen at all. We'll be on a look at YouTube. Ciao.